right, welcome back to another edition of Full Disclosure Conversations. I've been looking forward to this conversation for a while, ever since my guest agreed to come on with me. It's so easy in an age of social media and technology to view people through likes, through followers, and we forget that they're real people. We forget that they're people just like us. They've been through experiences. They've dealt with hurt and pain just like we do. They've dealt with trauma. They deal with triggers just the same way that we do. And I'm excited for this conversation because even before we came on live, just the ability to have a conversation with my guests. And so, for those of you that don't know, my guest today, you know him under the handle of True North Motivation. That's how I've always known him today. But as you can clearly see on his handle, it's just Chris. So, what I want to do is I want to Chris, I want to thank you for taking the time to come on and really have this conversation with me.
Absolutely, man. I love conversations. I love, like, to me, it's furthering God's kingdom is all it is. It's if I don't have these conversations in front of your audience, which is not always my audience,
Yeah.
then I don't further his kingdom. I don't show I am a testament to what he is. So how do you get that testament out? I don't have a book in the Bible. You know what I mean? Like
Right.
I'm not Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. So what I have to do is get in front of people through podcasts, through my reels, through my lives to really show what God can do with one man with all the suffering he's been through. So, yeah, I love doing this kind of stuff. Absolutely.
One of my favorite Christian artists is For Him, and their song is "I Want to Be a Man That You Would Write About." And to your point, we don't have a gospel that's written. There's not a gospel of Stephen. There's not a gospel of Chris, but that doesn't negate the very real stories that we have. And so, even in preparing for this conversation, there's a lot that I feel needs to be unpacked and just a lot that I really want to delve into. One of the things that I've noticed about you is that you obviously served. So I read your page today that you were a former Army Ranger. And so for the viewers who watch this live or for the viewers who watch it via playback, can you just describe and talk to us about what that experience was like? First of all, thank you for your service. Let me at least
Appreciate it.
lead with that. Thank you very much for your service. But can you walk us through what that experience was like for you?
Well, you got to remember, I served in a time since I served in 2005 through 2013. Obviously, I'm 40 something years old. So I was in college when 9/11 happened.
Mm,
And I still vividly remember having someone banging on my door and saying, "Man, you got to see what's on TV."
mm,
And then on top of it, we didn't have cell phones. I mean, cell phones were around, but nobody had them at that point, not in college. No. Right. But what we were getting is emails. Our emails were dinging left and right from professors canceling class.
yeah.
So it was a very real thing for me to say, I want to serve and go to war.
Mm,
I didn't go when there was no war. It was like, oh, I'm just going to make some money off the government. I went knowing and expecting to go to war.
yeah.
Right. So that experience was something that I had kind of prepared myself for. However, we all grew up in an age, in my group anyways, that played video games like first person shooters, like, Bond, Goldeneye, and all that stuff. And so for me, I had already romanticized the whole concept of what war was going to be like. I had watched Black Hawk Down. I
Yeah.
had watched all these war movies. And so I had this like envisionment in my head that it was going to be this romanticized idea. I will say, and pardon my language, there is a suck factor that goes into what you have to do.
Yeah.
And when we talk about suffering, like biblical level suffering, there are times where it really does get that way. Going
Yeah.
5 days without any food because
Mm,
we can't get resupplied because the weather is so bad they can't even bring the birds in with our resupply,
mm,
or even pick us up to take us back out. So we get stuck in positions where we're literally starving. We don't have water resupply. And so we have biblical level suffering in a lot of ways.
mm.
And getting past that suck factor is what helped me kind of transition, to what I do now, is understanding that the body and the mind can be pushed way further than I ever imagined going into
Mm.
the military. The military was what taught me that whenever you think your limits are, you can go about 70% further than you think. And that all of the barriers we face in life, whether it be a fear, whether it be not having enough knowledge for something, it is all made up in your brain. I had somebody tell me one time, once you realize that everything in this world was made by somebody that was no smarter than you're going to start to realize that you can do anything, you know?
Yeah.
And that's what the Army gave me, was that knowledge that I can do anything. I always have a phrase I use: 1,000, if you have a 1,000 hits on an oak tree, if you put them in 1,000 different spots, you're just going to damage the tree. It's going to look crazy. But if
Yeah.
I put 1,000 hits in the exact same spot, I'm going to bring that tree down. So the Army taught me that consistently doing something over and over again, you may not bring down the oak tree on the first hit, but if you hit it 1,000 times, you're going to bring it down.
Yeah.
So it gave me the consistency to just keep going, even when my body said no, even when my mind was screaming, I'm scared, just keep going.
Yeah.
And so that experience really forged me into the kind of public speaker that I am now, that on the surface looks like he has no fear. But I've learned to quell that fear using both God and the knowledge that what's the worst that's going to happen. You even said it earlier. What's the worst that's going to happen? They're going to say no. Oh, well, I just keep moving, right?
Right. Yeah. I think it's so easy to, fear is very real. And I think what I've heard it is, I think it's fear everything and run, or forget everything and rise. And that's one of the things that I've always just desire to do in my own life is, and it's so easy to get caught up in fear, whatever the fear is. I did a video on fear of rejection and fear of abandonment and fear of betrayal, and it comes in many different forms. And so I like that you even, and let me just tell the viewers, there was even an element of quote unquote fear or nervousness even in reaching out to Chris. So it was, I do just want the viewers to know that there was a part of me that was still very much dealing with it. But he did a reel, and I'm going to ask questions about some of his content in a little bit, but he did a reel, and it was essentially around you're waiting for confidence to magically appear, as if you don't realize that God has already called you, that God has already given you what you need to move forward. And that's exactly what we're doing. At the end of the day, maybe you feel this way. I know I do. We're Peter in the boat in the middle of a storm, seeing Jesus in the midst of the storm and saying, if it's you, bid me to come. And
Mhm.
that's really what I seek to do. One of the things that I noticed is that you have an upcoming book, and
Mhm.
it's 41 Days to Freedom. What's the release date? Just because I
Oh,
don't.
it's already been released. It's on
Oh, it has.
both my website and on Amazon. It's
Okay.
also available, I think, on Books a Million. There's a couple other places that it's available, but main two ways to get it's either through my website or through Amazon books as well.
Okay. So I'm just reading exactly what you have. You described in the book how you battled with self doubt as an Army Ranger. You survived war, heartbreak, and an abusive relationship. And you talk about the journey through trauma, pain, and self discovery. That was what I got from your description. And so, one of the biggest questions, my podcast, I want to talk about trauma. I want to talk about triggers because I don't think there's enough of a spotlight that's shined on it. And so, what I want to ask you is, how was that trauma and pain, whether in the Army or whether from an abusive relationship, how was that made real to you? And when did you realize that you actually needed to address it and heal and recover from it?
Ooh, that's a good question. So yeah, as you read there, I have multiple levels and layers of grief that I've been through in traumatic events. So to kind of list out the things I've been through. In college, I attempted suicide once because of some things that I had done and felt very shameful over. Um, Good thing it didn't work out because here I am with you, right?
Right.
I had a buddy of mine step on an IED about 15 feet from me, threw me into a wall, cut him clean in half, took his life. And it ended up being my fault. Even though he was the one that stepped on the pressure plate, I made a mistake in who I was talking to telling somebody, because we knew that the pressure plate was there. So I had thought I was letting my guys know. Turns out that the 3 people I let know, one of them was not Rodriguez. So Rodriguez never got the message. He did what any good soldier was doing, which was going to the most likely avenue of approach and stepped on the ID. So
Mm.
I've wrestled for years with the fact that I'm the reason that a son does not have his father. I'm the
Mm.
reason that a mother lost her son and had to bury him. And
Mm.
that's a heavy toll to really deal with. But
Yeah.
even further after that, I mean, I dealt with, a second marriage that failed, even though I had a son with her. And then I entered into an abusive relationship that at the first 6 months, it felt like the greatest relationship I had ever been in my entire life.
Yeah.
Great feeling woman, was hitting all the green flags, right? And somewhere at about 6 months, it started to take a turn for the worse. By the time 9 months happened, somewhere between 6 and 9 months, I got hit by the first time. And as a man, to be able to sit there and admit to people, like, I've been hit by a woman, I've been physically abused, they're like, you come on, man. I'm like, I grew up in a family that taught and you never hit a woman, right? And you never
Yeah.
even use violence unless it is life or death. It's the way
Yeah.
I was raised. So to admit to other people, like, hey, man, I've been abused, has been crazy. But that trauma, I tell you what, trauma, it's not what we think it is in a lot of ways. We all see it as something that hurts us.
Mm.
And through all of the work I've done to address it, I have come to find out that it actually is what forges you into a better human being.
Yeah.
Struggle and sacrifice and all of these things are what actually give you the confidence that you're looking for, is
Mm.
doing the hard things, right?
Yeah.
So somewhere, it was after my explosion and getting blown up, I kind of tried to shove it aside. I try to say,
Mm.
it's all good. I'll live with it. That typical man kind of attitude of, I don't need therapy. I'm just going to suck it up and keep going.
Mm.
I noticed over time that I was becoming emotionally reactive when I wasn't before. Right. I was starting to lash out at people that didn't deserve it. I started, getting triggered by the dumbest little things, like being very, very short tempered when I really wasn't always short tempered. I have a temper. I'm a man. I mean, that's
Yeah.
part of who we are at times. Right. But
Right.
it was never as short tempered as it slowly was becoming after I got blown up. Still kind of shoved it down. And it wasn't until my divorce that I said, okay, well, I need to at least try to start addressing the issue with just that one thing, just being blown up and that grief right there. I started going to therapy quite regularly, but therapy is hard because you have to have a real connection with that therapist. It's not
Mm.
as easy as just, looking in the phone book and being like, okay, Bob, I'm going to
Yeah.
go to Bob, right?
Right.
Well, if Bob doesn't really feel, if you don't feel like he understands you or he's creating a safe space, you're not going to ever get anything done because you're not going to feel safe enough to open up to this person. So I bounced around counselors and then eventually I quit. I said, I can't do it. Right. I'll just deal with it on my own. I knew I had a problem, but I always felt like the therapy was just not going to do it. Like
Yeah.
that wasn't the help I needed. Then I get into the abusive relationship. It slides because not only was she abusive physically, but it brought out the anger in me much, much
Mm.
more. And as much as I'd like to say, yeah, she was, because she is a diagnosed narcissist. So it's not like this, like just a mean person. Like we're talking about personality disorder. Okay.
Mm.
So it was like I was still at the same time throwing gasoline on the fire. Like it
Mm.
wasn't that it was just all her fault. I was making it worse with a lot of my behaviors that were all rooted in my trauma from my past, right?
Yeah.
Get out of that relationship. And that's when, in the twilight of that relationship, I asked her, I said, I want to make this work. Can we go to counseling?
Mm.
And through that experience of going to 6 sessions with her to where my now therapist, who I go to now, because I learned that this dude is awesome. Like he got me. He understood me. He was a military chaplain, so he was both an ordained minister, but he's also a psychologist, right? So he's a
Right.
little bit of both. So through that time with him and just those 6 sessions, and I had never heard the word narcissist thrown around until then. He let me know that, like, he's like, I study personality disorders pretty heavily, and this woman is exhibiting all the signs of, narcissistic personality disorder.
Mm.
So she decides after 6 sessions, she's like, screw this, because she thought it was just going to be a chance for her to say, look, see, he's the problem. When in
Mm.
reality, I sat there and took it most times and let her just berate me right there in front of the counselor. and she decided this isn't for me anymore. And that's when she ended up cheating on me. And it just that was like the flushing of the toilet, the turd was gone kind of thing, right? It's time to get away. But I did that work with him then in getting out of that relationship. I said, okay, now it's time to not only fix what I've damaged from her, because the gaslighting, the manipulation had really done a toll on my brain. My reality was like upside down, right?
Yeah.
But in doing that therapy, it unlocked everything else, because you do a trace back. The trigger is just the end result, right? You talk about triggers all the time. That is the end result of a trauma that happened probably 20, 30 years ago,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? And
Yep.
so we did the work to trace it back. So you say, okay, well, I lashed out at this. Well, why? Because she did this. Okay, why does that bother you? Oh, because that looks like this. Well, and then we traced it all the way back, even through my trauma in the military, back to, the suicide that I went through, the shame that I went through, because I ended up attempting suicide because I was blackout drunk at a party and had sex with another woman other than my fiance. And so
Wow.
because of that, the shame, when I got told, but I had to get told by somebody else that I did it. Like,
Mm.
I didn't even remember. I literally went home from the party. Like, somebody dropped me off at her apartment. I slept in the same bed as her. It was like 2 days later, somebody let me know. So I attempted to take my life because I said I wasn't worth it anymore. But I traced it even through that all the way back to, like, things that have happened in my childhood. And I had a great childhood, but there are still things that damaged me,
Yeah.
that and I don't fault or blame my parents for in any way, shape, or form. They did a great job of raising me, but there were things they did that were not very good for a child to hear, you
Yeah.
know. And so we got to trace that trigger from its end point where it comes out, and we when we react to the trigger, we take that little piece and we trace it all the way back. And that therapist helped me understand what triggers really are, why they're even there, how the nervous system works. And that's the end result. And it's amazing when you finally take ownership of that kind of stuff and you say, I'm going to fix me for once. It's not going to be somebody else's fault. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. It's something that I've even wrestled with myself. I was having a conversation today just about my own parents. So a little bit about me. I grew up in the church. I was a pastor's kid. I know what it's like to fall asleep in the pew and everything like that. My parents did the best that they could. My dad did the best that he could. He's no longer with us now, but even just being able to trace those triggers, because one of the things that has really been revealing to me is, and I'm just going to talk about just concept of Bible and the enemy. He's very subtle in the way that he works, because he can introduce trauma, he can introduce circumstances or events when we're kids, and when we're not even cognizant, when we're not even aware of what's going on. But the subtlety isn't necessarily in the trauma, it's in the trigger that's associated with the trauma. Because what
Mhm.
it can do, it wasn't what was above the surface that sunk the Titanic, it was what was below the surface. And so those triggers will, not only will the trauma be present, but the trigger will be there, and they can lay dormant for years. And you
Mhm.
don't even realize that they're there until you're maybe an adolescent or you're a young adult, and those triggers begin to be activated. And you may have this, what the heck is going on? Why am I reacting this way? Why
Mhm.
am I saying these things? And that's one of the things that I've had to realize for myself, is identifying those triggers. And I have a question, because of one of your reels, about those triggers, because it's not enough. And you can tell me what your thoughts are. It's not enough to just deal with the trauma and heal from the trauma, but it's recognizing the triggers. And actually, being, my dad passed away from COVID in 2021, and I realized, I just turned 42. I realized that I had unprocessed grief. I realized that I had things, even stuff that I had, issues that I had with him. He did the best he could. He did the best
Mhm.
he could, but there was some things that he was emotionally absent. I could never
Mhm.
remember him saying, I'm proud of you. A lot of the skills that you would think a man needs to have as an adult, he never taught me those things. And so it was even dealing with resentment, dealing with some of those things myself. And I've been forced to deal with a lot of these things. And so I'm grateful for you sharing that, because and I'm grateful for your platform, because people don't really, I don't hear this stuff being talked about in pulpits. I don't hear pastors, I don't hear preachers, I don't hear church leaders. I don't hear them talking about this stuff. And yet you have a lot of people that are suffering in silence. And I think that might be something that I remember seeing on your page, or suffering alone. And there are a lot of people in the churches today that they're dealing with all this trauma, all these triggers, and they don't even know how to handle it.
Mhm.
And so,
Well, triggers are interesting because, you kinda touched on it, like, they lay dormant for years, right? And one of the things I tell people that have been through traumatic relationship, and this is a good example of how to use it, is that I have got to now expose you to your triggers. If you
mm,
want to beat your trauma, you have to be exposed to your triggers to learn
wow,
how to circumvent them. The problem is that sometimes you don't know what they are. They
yeah.
may not resurface for years. Good example of that is I got blown up, okay? The smells of an explosion are irreplaceable. Not even fireworks will smell like it. Like, it's just there's nothing that really compares. 10 years later, I thought I had beat all my triggers. I thought I was good, right? And when you get that smell of that explosion, right? So I was driving by a range on Fort Bragg, and I hadn't done so in a very long time. I'd been out of the military for 4 or 5 years, but I was heading out to a town that was on the other side of Fort Bragg, and it just so happened like the wind must have been right that it blew the air from an explosion on the base across the road, and I smelled it as I'm driving. I ended
Mm,
up breaking down right there. I didn't know that was gonna be a trigger. I had no clue because I hadn't smelled that smell in years, but it's now a trigger.
yeah.
They surface at the weirdest times and when you can't control it, but you still have to expose yourself to it to learn how to calm your nervous system down
Mm,
enough to be able to process what's going on. The problem is that the brain hijacks us, and it starts going into overdrive, fight or flight, and we start doing things that we wouldn't normally do. So we've got to expose ourselves to that trigger with the knowledge and how to actually activate our nervous system into a healthy system, and that's the only way you're ever going to get past it. Otherwise, you're going to continue to be triggered. That's
yeah.
why therapy a lot of times doesn't work, is because they deal with the trigger, but they don't give you a tool to fix it. They just
Mm,
say, let's understand it. But I give the tools to fix it, to a lot of the people that I work with. So yeah, it's interesting when you talk about triggers because yeah, they are below the surface. They are the iceberg that hit the Titanic, essentially.
yeah. And one thing I've learned, especially in the context of relationships. So I was married before, was married for 15 years, went through the whole process of separation and divorce. And it's interesting, even realizing now the triggers that I have, even from my marriage that I have. And it's funny the way that God chooses relationships to expose those triggers. I did a video not too long ago about relationships being mirrors, and they show you who you are, especially with that person that you give them access to your life. I'm convinced the more access you give someone to your life, the more they're going to expose things in your life, and the more you're either going to love what you see or you hate what you see. And
Hmm.
that's one of the things that I've, even in this context of dating nowadays and relationships, one of the things that I love and is just the whole concept of iron sharpening iron, and the
Hmm.
need that we have to be sharpened, the need that we have to be strengthened. And to your point, the concept of I love what you said. We have to be exposed to the trigger, and there's that in and of itself, and that's not always a painless process. It may very well, I'm going to use your language, it's suck factor. It may very well suck when you are exposed to that trigger, because triggers more often than not are going to come with a response associated with it too. And at that point, you may be now dealing with patterns and habits that you've developed as a result of that trigger when you didn't even know the trigger was there.
Hmm.
And
Absolutely.
that's one of the things that I've realized is unlearning it. It's this whole concept of deconstructing. I've had to unlearn patterns. I've had to unlearn behaviors. I've had to unlearn responses. Even having a conversation today is so many times we deal with the fruit and we don't deal with the root. and the root is just allowed to stay there. And I have roots in my life right now where it's like, God, you need to pluck this up. Like, you need to get rid of this now. 42 years old, and I still deal with roots, which is, I
Mhm.
mean, crazy to think about, but I still have roots that I need to address. One of the things, probably one of my favorite reels that you do, and I want to shift to content because I feel like it's going to help frame this conversation. You do a reel, and you said, Jesus never said, "Come to me, all you who are crushing it and living their best life." He said, "Come unto me, all who labor and are heavy laden." And so the question that I have, and this is maybe especially as men, of course, in the context of women too, but especially as men, why do you think it's so easy for us to suppress our weariness and our brokenness and even our hurt and pain rather than dealing with it?
Why is it that way? Well, it's easier. We want the easy way. Human beings are designed to look for easy, not the painful,
Yeah.
right? And so it to us, and here's the caveat to anyone that thinks that holding on to it is easier. On the surface, it's easier. In the long run, it is way more painful for a
Yeah.
few reasons. One, because if we never deal with that pain, we're probably going to be sinning and not even knowing we're sinning and not even repenting for those sins. We're going to end up going to hell because the way we are treating other people, because
Mm,
we are failing to deal with that pain,
yeah.
right? And that's part of it. The other part is that, I imagine it like this: the pain of going through, say, therapy to deal with it is going to cost you $50, right? You can pay that all right now. That's the pain that people want to say. No, it's not. It costs you $1 to hold on to that pain today,
Mhm.
right? Now, you go long enough like that, it's going to outlast that cost the therapy is going to have, because the therapy is one-time charge essentially when you think about it, in the sense of you unlock that trauma, you get it all out. It may take you a year, but it's going to cost you, say it does cost you $50 in emotional weight, right? But if it costs you $1 every day to hold on to it, you go an entire year, now you've paid the price 4 or 5 times as much because of the way you're living life, just with these pins and needles on the inside and not dealing with it. But
Yeah.
we as human beings see the easy of, oh, I don't have to give up $50. I'll just give up the dollar. That's fine. But we
Yeah.
don't realize the long-term cost of that. And the longer we go, there's an old adage that says, it's an old Chinese proverb someone told me one time. I don't even know if it's really a Chinese proverb, but I'm going to give it anyways because it works in this situation. It
Right.
says that as soon as you realize you're on the wrong train, get
Mm,
off at the next station, because the
mm.
longer you stay, the more expensive the return trip is. And that
Wow.
that talks a lot to us that try to hold on to it, right? It took me 10 years before I started even therapy for my, getting blown up and the grief that I was dealing with there. And it took me a good 5-10 years to get rid of that grief to where I can carry it now,
Yeah.
right? Had I dealt with it initially right then and there, I probably would have had maybe a year of therapy and then a wonderful life going forward. But my aversion to it caused me a 10-year time where I'm
Mm,
suffering and then another 10-year time of trying to get rid of it. So that's why I say, you've got to deal with it now, not later, you know. And in all honesty, I think the way God designed it was that he wants you to hurt so that way you finally realize that the only way through life is to lean on him. You
mm.
won't lean on him if you don't have to suffer. Like,
Yeah.
suffering causes the need to have God in your life to bring you through that and to give purpose to your suffering.
Mm,
Otherwise, if the purpose of life is just to suffer, oh man, why are we even here? That sucks. God gives you the reasons behind that suffering, because in my case, all of my suffering led me to a place where now my coaching is effective because I've been through the same experiences that 90% of my clients have been through, whether it be a narcissistic abuse relationship, PTSD, TBIs, ADHD, all of those things are what I coach on. And I'm only relatable because God put me through all these trials that forged me into the man that I am, that is able to coach them, if that makes sense.
that makes sense. One of the stories that I absolutely love in the Bible, and just listening to you talk, I love the story of Joseph, right? Joseph was he was betrayed by his brothers. He was cast into a pit. They wanted to kill him. And eventually they end up selling him into slavery. And he gets wrongly accused by Potiphar's wife. He gets thrown in prison. He gets forgotten about in prison. And then, of course, the story goes that Pharaoh has dreams. He provides the interpretation. And so to shorten the narrative of the story, Pharaoh ends up promoting him into second in all of Egypt. And he names one of his sons based on his past experience, which is crazy when you think about it. And it's God made me forget the trouble of my father's house. God made me forget it. And it's interesting because he wanted to try and forget what he went through. He wanted to forget the pain. He wanted to forget it. And this goes into the whole concept of purpose because, this is something I really feel like I've been working with the Lord, is sometimes we don't realize the reason why we went through what we went through until someone shows up at our doorstep asking for bread.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the story of Joseph. He didn't realize, all he wanted to do was forget it. And yet his brothers show up asking for bread. And at that point, he's like, you meant this for evil, but God meant it for good. I had to go through this. I had to experience the betrayal. I had to experience all this. What you meant for evil, God turned around for good. But I had to walk through that. And I like what you said about God. We have to experience the hurt, and life is going to be hard. Life is going to hurt. Did I anticipate going through separation and divorce after being married for 15 years? No. Did I anticipate my dad being a COVID statistic when we know what happened during all that? Absolutely not. I had no plans for that. There's no formula for it. There's nothing that prepares you for that. There's nothing that prepares you to stand by your father's bed, watching him breathe his last. And what do you do in that moment? And I stayed in the hospital room for an hour because I knew who I was going to be leaving behind, and dealing with all of that trauma, dealing with all of that pain. And I'm realizing that God has me on this journey of inner healing, right? And I'm convinced you're never too young to explore healing, but you're also never too old. And that's one of the biggest things is 42. And I'm realizing, listen, Stephen, you still have some stuff that you need to be healed from. And so I want to ask you a question, because there's another reel that you did, and this is what healing comes with the cost. It's about facing who you became while you were hurting. And so one of the questions that I have is, how do we deal with the hurt we've experienced without becoming the very thing that hurt us or we swore we would even become?
Well, the first step is to get into healing as fast as you can when you hurt.
Yeah.
Like, here's a good example of that. Like, so I see my therapist every like month now.
Mhm.
Okay. If I'm dating someone and let's say I've got a really great relationship going on, it's going on for 2 years. I'm seeing my therapist every month, just kind of a maintenance for what I've got going on in my life. And then I break up with her. Well, my first call is to my therapist. Hey man, it's time to unpack this.
Right.
Right. And the cost is a lot less. That's what I was just talking about earlier. I pay that $50 up front and I suck it up and I say, hey, therapist, it's time to do some work because I got heartbreak on my head now. And I don't want to bleed on anyone else. Right.
Mm,
And we do become an evil creature when we hold on to that pain.
mhm.
Right. And it's not trusting that the Lord knows why that pain happened. So we feel like we've got to hold on to it. It becomes a razor blade that we are squeezing that razor blade saying, why are you cutting me? Now,
Mm,
granted, that razor blade came from somebody else that abused us or treated us unfairly or whatever. But by us not letting it go, we get angry and we end up lashing out at those that we love because we're afraid to let go of that grief.
yeah.
Right. And so to get to that point means that you've stuffed it down. If you're going to be lashing out at other people, you've stuffed it down for so long that it boils over. They have the analogy of a Coke bottle. Emotions like a Coke bottle. If you shake that bottle up and you just keep bottling it up, eventually it's going to explode. The cap's going to go off, and what's going to happen? The entire Coke bottle is going to come out. The problem is that typically happens directed at somebody you love, you
Yeah.
know? And so if you don't deal with it, you have to understand the cost going forward is going to be the best relationships of your life will be cost because you did not face your trauma. You can
Yeah.
blame them for walking away all you want, but at the end of the day, you pushed them away, you treated them poorly, you failed to be emotionally present for them, and all you did was ruin that relationship because you didn't actually do the work necessary to heal your trauma. And that's hard for a lot of people to hear, man, because they don't want it's scary. It's scary to go out there and actually unpack that kind of trauma and talk about the bad things that you've done and the bad things that you've become with somebody. It's not easy to admit where we were at fault, but it's the only way to not bleed on other people, you know?
Yeah. I love all of what you said, but just specifically that last part. And I've seen this on social media, and I may butcher the quote, but it's essentially this: if you don't heal from what cut you, you'll bleed all over those people who didn't cut you.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
it hit me like a ton of bricks when I heard that, because it's important for me, because I think there's, especially in relationships, it's easy to bleed all over other people. We bleed our hurt, we bleed our pain, we bleed all of these different things. And one of the things that I've struggled with is this whole concept of projection, right? And just projecting onto someone new, right? To use your point earlier, you get into a new relationship, and I project my past hurt, I project my past experiences, I project all of this, and now what I do is I create maybe unfair and unrealistic expectations, and then expectations are the breeding ground for disappointment. And so I heard someone's just said this to me the other day. They said sometimes we hurt our own feelings because of our expectations, either because we don't communicate them effectively, or because we they're unrealistic. And when they said that, it literally just said this to me last night, and I wrote it down because I'm like, that is so good. Just the need to communicate. One of my favorite quotes is, God will put you back together in front of the very people that broke you.
Or do I have a story for you on that one?
Go ahead.
Right. Okay. So when I was in that abusive relationship, somewhere in between the marriage that ended with, that I had my son with, and this abusive relationship, which was about 3 years from 2016, 2019, I got it in my head. I want to be a motivational speaker,
Yeah.
a Tony Robbins, an Ed Milet, Eric Thomas, one of those guys that gets up there and just is motivational. Right. And I started talking to the abusive one about it. I'm like, I'm gonna be a motivational speaker. And she was like, oh, no one will listen to you, like all these things. And she beat me down over time. And the dream just kind of kept getting lost because, I would do some work on something and then she'd beat me down over it and literally tell me I'm stupid, I'm wrong, no
Mm.
one's gonna listen to me, no one cares what I have to think, and just abuse me with that kind of phrasing over and over. So come the end of the relationship 2022, that's when I decided to start the company, right?
Yeah.
I was walking out of a Lowe's and I saw a truck that said like True North Roofing, and it hit me. And I feel like Joseph in this mind, where like I had the lucid dream, like I saw
Yeah.
all the details kind of thing. And
Yeah.
it was like True North Motivation. He gave me the logo, which right here on the mic, but he gave me the logo, he gave me the phrase, and I saw visions of myself on stages talking to people and all of those things, right? Well, funny enough, I ended up, her and I go to the gym, the same exact gym. It's the only gym, you can really go to within, 20 minutes of our houses. We live
Yeah.
in separate houses, obviously now, but it's the only gym around, right? I see her every single morning in the
Oh,
gym, and I have for the last 4 years now since I got out of that relationship. And so when you say he'll put you back together, I mean, I went from being nothing to now. She used to know I had a work truck when I worked for public utilities. I
yeah.
know she's seen that work truck go away, and I know that my logo is now all over the place, and my reels are all over the internet. You know what I mean? So I
Yeah.
know that she's sitting there sulking that, yeah, he put me back together directly in front of her every single morning, showing what I am. You know what I mean? And it's 100% true. He will, because but we have to be obedient to God. I want that to be known, is that if you are not obedient to God, you are going nowhere.
Yeah.
Right. You can have all the best intentions in your heart, and you can browbeat people with that Bible all you want. But if you're not walking God's purpose and God's path for you, you won't be blessed 100%, because obedience is the magic that we have to have in order to be what God wants us to be. You can't get to what God wants you to be if you're not obedient. Even when he tells you to jump and it seems freaking crazy, you
Yeah.
jump. You know what I mean? And that's the hard part for a lot of people, is being obedient in those moments, right?
Yeah. One of the things that I've always loved, and I feel like Joseph is just highlighted for some reason in our conversation, but one of the things I love about Joseph is there came a day when no one recognized him, right? The same people that betrayed him, the same people that sold him into slavery, they stood before him and didn't even realize, they didn't even recognize who it was, because all they saw him through was through the lens of what they had put him through, and they weren't able to see who God had called him to be. And I love what you said about obedience, because that's Joseph's story. He was a man of faithfulness. He was a man of obedience, even in the midst of his suffering, even in the midst of his hurt, even in the midst of his pain. God honors that. And I want to really build on what you just said, is because God honors that obedience. He honors it when we hear his voice, when we obey him, and when we allow him to do in us what he wants us to do. And I love your story, because it when I heard that quote, it's funny, I could see the reel in my mind right now, and just what the concept of God putting us back together in front of the very people that broke us, and just the power of testimony. I want to kind of build on this concept of healing a little bit more, because there's another reel that you did, and it says healing isn't about becoming who we were before the hurt. This one really hit me. It's about becoming someone new, someone who won't beg for love, someone who won't justify mistreatment, and who knows their worth. And I watched that reel, and it hit me, because we've been taught, we've been trained, and this was my thinking, this was my psychological path, so to speak, where you have to go back to who you were before the hurt. You have to go back to who you were before the pain. And so one of the questions that I just wanted to ask you is, why do you think we need to feel the objective is to return to the old rather than become something new? And was there, for you personally, was there ever any time when you thought either you needed to return back to who you once were, or you were just, you know what, I'm just need to be, God is forging this new path, and now this is what I'm going to pursue?
Yeah, that was a reel that came because I wrestled with that for a long time.
Mhm.
When and that one came specifically because of the abusive relationship, because
Mhm.
I was such an optimist, not a pessimist before her, and I became a pessimist because of her.
Yeah.
What our brain is doing when we do that, when we say want to get back to it, what we're saying is, I want to go back to the good parts of who I was before. But the problem on that thinking is guess what? You go back to that person, you're now susceptible to the same abuse and
Mhm.
heartbreak all over again, because you didn't learn.
Wow.
So when I made that correlation that I don't want to be that person anymore, because that person was weak and did get hurt. That person that I was before got abused because I didn't know enough. So I have to become a whole new version of myself that takes the good parts of that person and then adds in the knowledge of how to defend myself against evil again. Right? I
Yeah.
didn't know enough then. I want to keep the good parts. And that is the sentiment we're all after when we say we want to get back to that person. But we have to say that the new person will have those qualities and new qualities that'll make us a stronger version than we ever could be in that old version of us, you
Yeah.
know? And that's what is so important to people, is that we have to forge our way forward as a new person that still retains those qualities. That's all it has to be, not getting back to who you were.
Yeah. It's something that I've and it's so easy to do, right? It's so easy to fall into that trap of go back to who we were before the hurt. But I love what you said because you're susceptible. And I did another reel and it was from toxic to toxic, and how even doing something like that can be the breeding ground for what I'm going to call it is a repeat offender, right? We
Mhm.
can become our own repeat offenders, where if we don't heal from things, if we don't learn from things, we're going to repeat the same offense over and over again. We're going to go from one toxic relationship to the next toxic relationship. We're going to go from one toxic environment to the next toxic environment. And then all the while, we wonder what's going on. And then we want to blame the other person. We want to look at them. And this is, I've had to confront that when in reality, it's me. Like, it's me. I am the problem. And this is one of the things that I really feel like God is speaking to me and just showing me is you need to deal with this because, right, when we were in school, right, we like to take a test, pass it, and be done with it. We didn't want to take it again. But what God sometimes does is if he gives you a test and let's say you fail that test, you may get that test again. And
Oh, you're
he
going to get that test again because God's saying, I need you to learn this lesson. I cannot move on because to build you into the person that you need to be, you have to learn the lesson. It's not enough to understand the lesson, you have to learn the lesson.
Yeah.
So if you've been in an abusive relationship, he probably won't bring you another abusive relationship so that way you have learned your lesson to walk away from it. The
Yeah.
problem is the comfort level. Relationships that are abusive and you go from toxic to toxic, there's a comfort level because it's a known quantity, right? You don't have to be vulnerable in new ways. You can be in the same position where, like, okay, I know how to deal with somebody that is mean and know how to deal with these comments and I know how to get past it. So it's a comfort level, but you've got to learn that lesson. Otherwise, you're going to keep getting beat over the head by the billy club that God has. Like, come here, buddy. You need to learn your lesson.
Yeah.
And that's the hard part for people is to realize that you not only have to understand the lesson, you have to make the choice to be better the next time that lesson comes around. Otherwise, God's going to keep throwing you that curveball over and over again until you hit it.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things that I struggled with was not even just that whole concept of toxic to toxic, but one of the is staying in that environment for a prolonged period of time. Right. So one of
Mhm.
the things that I look back over, even in my own marriage and everything, is staying in it longer than I feel I probably should have. And I think it's so easy for us to do. And I don't know if it's necessarily what I would call Stockholm syndrome. I know what Stockholm syndrome is, so I don't know if you have a different way that you would describe it, but it almost becomes more comfortable to stay in, we'll just call it the abuse or the dysfunction. And it's why people will stay in an abusive relationship or a relationship where someone is battling an addiction or a relationship where somebody is continually cheating on them because there's this familiarity. There's this, we become comfortable in that. And yet we don't realize exactly what is needed. And that's something that I feel like God is really showing me in my own life is, and I feel like he's like, have you learned your lesson?
Mhm.
Have you
And
learned?
what you're describing too is the concept that until the pain of what you're holding on to is above the pain of the growth you have to go going forward and leaving, you're going to stay in that position
Mhm.
because we have to understand is that like when you say for example my experience leaving an abusive relationship, right? Why did I stay for 3 years? Why
Yeah.
did I stay in that environment? Well, the pain of having to restart a life because I'd already moved in with this woman. She, had made me sell all of my furniture. So now I got the pain of having to buy a new house or rent something, move all my stuff, starting over in life, having to deal without a partner, having to deal with, the pain of having to tell everybody why this relationship failed over and over again. The list of pains are there. It's like death by 1,000 cuts. There's 1,000 pieces of pain that I have to go through in coming out of that relationship.
Yeah.
Well, it was easier to stay in that relationship and live a lie, so to speak. And at one point though, the pain of it got to be too much when she decided to cheat on me. That's when the pain of holding on became too much. And
Mm.
I said, I'm willing to go through those things now And that's what it takes is the pain of holding on is greater than the pain of what you have to go through to get rid of that problem in your life. And that's kind of what you're talking about.
Yeah. It's definitely, and that's one of the things that I struggled with. I always joked, I said dating in your 40s or starting over in your 40s should come with a manual and a fully stocked bar. That's kind of how I joke about it. I'm
Yep.
like, it needs, because there's nothing, and nothing prepares you for having to start all over.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing in I haven't really found anything in the Bible that says this is how you come out on the other side of it, especially even dealing with divorce. The Bible talks, God hates divorce. And so even growing up in the church, there's this stigma where, okay, now I understand that there's times when you need to fight, and I understand that. So I get the concept. But even just like what you were talking about, the pain of staying, like eventually it just becomes too much. And one of the quotes I absolutely love is, if it costs you, what is it? If it costs you your mental health, it's too expensive. If
Mm-hmm.
it
Yeah.
costs you your emotional safety, it's too expensive. And when that bill comes due and you see how high that bill is, you can look at it and you can cringe all you want, but at the end of the day, there's only one person who determined that bill. And that's one of the things that I had to deal with is, what? I made this bill as high as it was. I'm the one that
Mm-hmm.
racked up the bill. And now I not only do we have to pay the bill, I have to pay the tip, I have to do all of these different things. When in reality, I could have just completely, I could have learned it a little bit earlier. I could have stepped away a little bit earlier. And so one of the things that I want to shift to another one of your reels too, because there's some that I really liked, and I really want to do this concept of healing. But that you said love isn't about who's willing to suffer for you, but who's willing to heal beside you.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that, because we've been taught, and I don't know if you've struggled with this, I know I have. We've been taught that we need to be fully healed before entering into another relationship. We've been taught that, as if, and you did another, as if forgetting that the part of the journey never happened. And so I want to talk about is that a fallacy? Is that just something that we're just completely dropping the ball with? Where, because I believe that, and I focus so much and on being completely healed. And do I need to be at a certain level before I'm ready? Not realizing that there's a part that I play in her healing. There's a part that she plays in my healing as well. And then collectively we heal together.
Okay. I got a real good way to explain this one. So when we've had bad experiences in life, right? Imagine your brain has got only so many gigabytes of memory. Okay.
Mhm.
So if half of my memory is clogged up with all of these events of all this trauma that I've been through, right? And think about it in the sense of behavioral pattern recognition. If every time I shared my emotions, I was beat down by somebody, then basically I've never had emotional safe space. I don't know what that looks like, don't know what that feels like. I can heal from what those people have said and done to me, right? But my brain is now riddled with the fact that those people hurt me every time I opened up. That means I can never truly heal
Yeah.
because I need something to overwrite those gigabytes that are all stored as just bad.
Mm.
And you have to overwrite it with more good experiences. So the body trusts based on that pattern recognition. And if I have, say, 20 instances of something that has happened, that 20 times I opened up and 20 times that I was hurt, I need to have one that replaces one of the bad memories. So now I've got 19 and one good experience. Then I need to replace another one. Now I've got 18 and two, until I get to a point where I'm like 80% of the time I open up and I'm not swat down for it. Guess
Yeah.
what? You can't do that on your own. You
Yeah.
can't. Somebody else has to walk into your life and show you good behavior patterns that are showing you emotional safety before you're going to overwrite it. So no matter how much time has passed and how much healing you've done, you're never going to get anywhere unless you are willing to put yourself in a position to extend trust to someone with your emotions. The
Yeah.
difference is that we have to learn how to walk away from it sooner if it is not for us. You even said it. If it costs your emotional safety, it's too much. If it costs you your mental health, it's too much. So when you go to a new relationship, you do afford that person the opportunity. Okay, I'm going to open up. The second they show you that they are not going to hold space for that emotion, you're gone.
Yeah.
That's where we start building trust for ourselves, because I trust that I have enough self-respect to walk away. Now we stay in that position longer, then I'm just doing the same thing. I'm rewriting old memories with the same type of memory over and over again. And I'm never going to get anywhere though, but you can't, that's exposing yourself to your triggers, right?
Yeah.
And I can't expose myself to a trigger that comes in relationships if I'm not in a relationship. So
Right.
healing can only be done. Like, I'll put it to you this way. You have to understand how to regulate your own emotions and then go into a relationship. At that point, you're healed as much as you can internally, but you're not going to be able to get the rest of it until you get into a relationship. So there
Mm.
is a level of healing you have to come to, the ability to let go of the people of your past in order to pick up the people in your future. But there's a myth that you have to be healed, you have to be fully healed. No, there's no such thing as fully healed. We spend our lifetimes learning and getting better and growing. We
Yeah.
heal from the heartbreak, and once that has dissipated, then we get in the relationship. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. It makes complete sense. There's there's a couple of other things that I want to continue building on your some of your content because I feel like it all goes hand in hand. This is one that you just did. You said the real flex. I love this. The real flex, training your mind to be stronger than your emotions, making your boundaries stronger than your empathy, and not being a slave to your triggers.
Mhm.
That in and of itself is a lot. And so one of the things that I want to ask is because it's so easy to be governed by our emotions. It's so easy for us to be governed by our emotions. It's so easy for us to be governed by our emotions and to become slaves to our triggers. And so the question that I wanted to ask is sort of just if there was an inspiration for this reel and what actually prompted you to put this, because a lot of people talk about what the real flex is, especially when it comes to being a man and what it really is. And then I listen to this and it almost seems countercultural, right? It almost seems like it goes against the grain, especially as a man who's listening to this, talking about boundaries and talking about being stronger than your emotions. So my question is, an inspiration for this reel? And then another question is, we might have already touched on this, but what do we do with the triggers that have been imprinted? So they're revealed. We know they're there, right? We become aware of their presence. But now that we are aware of their presence, what do we do, or what do you recommend once we've become aware of them and potentially how destructive they are, even in our own lives?
Mm. Well, the first part is that reel wasn't really, there was no experience that led me to that reel. A lot of what I do either comes from journals, which I have bookshelves on both sides that have journals from years of pain that I've been through
Mm,
heartbreak and things like that, where I'd write out my feelings, and they come to some of these epiphanies. But a lot of them are given to me by God. Like, he gives
yeah,
me a phrase, and then I craft and build a reel around that based on my knowledge of boundaries and all those things. And in that case, like, the idea of being a slave to your triggers was actually the core of what made me build everything else around it. And I've
yeah,
realized that society has put the emphasis on the wrong things. And why we're saying men are going the wrong directions, everyone says, well, men didn't used to speak up. No, they did. No, they did. Because I clearly can cite different men that were strong enough to be able to speak their emotions and be able to articulate them. There's more strength in being able to articulate weakness than there is in hiding it. It's
mm,
easy to hide your weakness. It's
yeah,
easy. But guess what? God's going to see it anyway, so you may as well just be vulnerable about it,
yeah,
right? You just be open about it and you say, "What are you going to do to me?" So I am this, so I am that. What does that mean? It doesn't really mean anything to me. If I give you power over me, I am making you a trigger. So
Yeah.
then triggers are all about us. Our triggers are us giving power to somebody else to hurt us,
Mm,
right? So how do you get past a trigger? Well, one, you got to learn what it is,
yeah.
right? And then we realize that the only reason it is a trigger is because we are allowing our nervous system to hijack us. It has nothing to do with it actually being a trigger. It's we're allowing the flush of adrenaline into our system. And why is that happening? Because we're not controlling our body. We're allowing the trigger to control our body. So
Mm,
we've got to take back over control. We do that through, we ever seen a man that's extremely mad and you see his nostrils flaring?
yeah.
But yet he doesn't react, right? Why is that? Well, it's because he has learned the art of breathing. Oh, he wants to tell you he hates you and he wants to berate you and he wants to point his finger in your face, but he realizes that's not going to do anything. So he breathes for a good 60 seconds, taking, deep breaths in and out, and he allows that information to go through the amygdala, which is the part that the fear center where fight or flight is activated. And he says, I ain't going to react out of that. And he allows it to go to the other part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, where we actually do the cognitive reasoning. And he
Yeah.
says, okay, I'm going to figure out what the best response for this is. His nostrils are still flaring as he's breathing, right?
Right.
That's saying that we all are triggered as human beings,
Yeah.
right? It's what we do with that trigger and how we combat it is the difference. The very first time you ever have to combat a trigger like that and you breathe and you realize, okay, it's not that big of a deal. I'm giving it more power than it's actually worth. We are realizing that it's a figment of our imagination. That is a huge, big problem that we are creating by allowing the fear to rule us. Once you realize that simple fact that it's fear ruling us in that trigger getting bigger, it's just like a kid who's afraid of the dark and there's a shadow on the wall and you trace that shadow back and it's only coming from this little, like it's a green army man that's sitting next to the light, right? But on the wall, it's this massive thing. We have let our figment of our imagination rule us instead of saying, okay, let's just flick on the light. Oh, it's just a little green army man, right? And we start realizing that the word fear is an absence of faith. And
Mm,
if we are Christian and we want to obey, we have to just say, no matter that fear is there or not, my faith will be stronger than my fear. And I
yeah.
will allow this person to do whatever they want to do to me, knowing that God's got me on the backside of it.
Yeah.
Right? They can yell at me, they can scream at me, they can throw things at me. I mean, hell, what was it? Peter? He got stoned, like, and he just let it happen. He's like, God's got me. That
Yeah.
we realize that our triggers are figments of our imagination built out of fear. You stop, you take those deep breaths, and you say, God has got me in this. I'm going to let them do whatever they want to do. I will state my truth, and then I will walk away. And I won't let that trigger control my life anymore. No, it sounds easy in practice, but it takes exposing yourself to it. And the first time, you may only get to the breathing part, and then you lash out, or you react, or you do something wrong. The next time you breathe and you give it a good 30 seconds and you start thinking, but then you still lash out. The next time it may be 5 minutes that you are able to control yourself. Through time, you start realizing to dissipate that power that it has over you. It's like you become desensitized over time to
Yeah.
that trigger, to where it's like, you don't have any power over me, you
Mm,
know, like the fat person that eats Twinkies. At first, that Twinkie has a lot of power over them. Once
yeah.
they lose all the weight, they're like, you don't have no power over me. I like broccoli, right? So it's allowing ourselves to go into the dark to realize there's nothing scary in the dark. That's all it really is.
Yeah. So good. Not letting it have power over you, realizing it's just a figment of your imagination. And I love what you said about just fear being the absence of faith. And it's interesting because even when Peter got out of the boat and he's walking on the water, he's walking in, and he took his eyes off of Jesus, right? So as long as he kept his eyes on Jesus, he was able to walk on the water. He was able to withstand the storm. He was able to withstand the wind and the rain and the waves. But the minute he took his eyes and he looked to the right and he looked to the left, is when that fear set in. And what it's interesting what Jesus says, because when Jesus, and I'm sure he did it as lovingly and as gently as he could, and this is what he said: "Oh, you of little faith." But he says, "Why did you doubt?" And
Mhm.
so it's this concept of faith over fear and just walking by faith. We walk by faith and not by sight. We trust in the Lord with all of our heart. We don't lean on our own understanding. We acknowledge him in all of our ways, and he directs our paths. And what is another verse that says, you will keep him in perfect peace whose mind is stayed on you. And
Mhm.
I'm realizing the importance of inviting Jesus into that healing, inviting the Lord into that healing, inviting him into those broken places of our lives. Because at the end of the day, here's what I want to do. I want to be a good husband to who I marry next. I want to be a good father, whether it's a biological father, whether it's a stepfather, whatever it may be. I want to be, and I saw another reel today. If you want to be a loving husband, you have to be a loving man. If
Mhm.
you want to be an honorable husband, you have to be an honorable man. I sent the reel to someone today, and it's so true because, and this is why I wanted to have the conversation with. I'm very much a verbal processor. I don't know
Mhm.
if you do. I'm a verbal processor, so having these conversations is like I'm
Light
learning.
bulb moments over and over again for you.
Yeah, yeah, it's very much that for me because I want to be, and we started this whole episode off by talking about gospels, and there is no gospel of Chris. There
Mm-mm.
is no gospel of Stephen. And would we really, and he's still writing our stories. He's still defining, he's still pruning, he's still getting rid of the one question that I want to ask, and this is nothing to do with your reels, and I don't know if this, I want to talk about the importance of having men around you, the importance of having because one of the things I love motorcycle clubs because of this, that camaraderie, that brotherhood that's in it. But I'm sure even serving in the army, you probably had that as well. And so now that you're out of the army, you're doing what you're doing. How important is it, not just for you, but even for me as a man, for someone? How important is it for us to just surround ourselves? I love the scene in the movie 300, right? The first one when they talk about the phalanx, I think is what it is. And the phalanx is simply thigh to shoulder, and you're only as strong as the person next to you. And so, my question is, how important is it to surround ourselves with other people? And what steps have you taken to make sure that you have that even in your own life?
It's extremely important, but here's the kicker to that. You don't just surround yourself with people. You
Yeah.
surround yourselves with the right people.
Yeah.
Meaning, if I surround myself with people that are non-Christian, it's not going to do me any good. It's
Yeah.
going to bring me down. They say if you hang around five smokers, guess what? You're going to be the sixth. If you hang
Yeah.
around, five drinkers, you're going to be the sixth. If you hang around four Christians and one Christian, you're more than likely going to end up not a Christian over time. So
Yeah.
it's important that we surround ourselves with people that are strong, right? It doesn't mean that we don't make friends with weak people, you know what I mean? Like that don't have Christ, because we do need to bring them into the fold at some point.
Yeah.
But I'm not surrounding myself and leaning on those people in the same way that I would lean on strong people, right? So I have two really good buddies, and that's it. That's the only men I surround myself with. Now, granted, there's my neighborhood, there's tons of great men in this neighborhood. I'm actually the only single dude like for miles in this neighborhood,
Hmm.
right? And most of them are married men, most of them are Christian, most of them are Republican, so we all get along. And we all feed off each other. Like as far as like I got your back. Oh, you need this tool, I got you. And then it's vice versa. We all like, oh, you need a hand carrying that couch, I got you. Like that community is extremely important to God's kingdom, because he even talks about that's one of the pillars right there is community. He wants community. That's what worship is designed for, is to have community, because without community, you don't, the commands are love me and love each other as you love me.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Well, you can't love other people if you're not in community with them.
Right.
Right. So it is important, but it's also important to be selective with who the inner circle of people you lean on are, to make sure that they can withstand and that they're going to reciprocate things to you. Other than that, you do need to surround yourself with men of high integrity. If they have high integrity, the rest can be figured out. If they don't have integrity, then you're not going to learn anything off of that man except for how to lie, steal, cheat, and do things that you shouldn't be doing anyway. So as long as they have integrity, surround yourself with them. But be careful not to surround yourself with too many, because then we get a watered down example of what to be,
Mm.
right? My other really good friend is actually my ex-wife's fiance. Real good dude. Awesome dude, right? And it's moments like that where you realize that the strong circle you have around you are people that are a lot like you and very strong with you. And we at the same time realize that they have weaknesses, we have weaknesses, and we lean on each other, and the outcome is better than we could have been individually on our own, if that makes sense.
It makes sense. Makes complete sense. Chris, I have one, maybe two more questions if you have the time. Um, I definitely want to touch on one of your reels. Um, this one really hit me. And a good man will pursue you. He'll show up. He'll make his intentions known without hesitation. I don't even think that was in the reel. I think I read that in the description. And so I'm asking this question. This is for Steven, right? This is
Mhm.
even in my own relationship, even in trying to make sure that I show up for her, show up for the question is, what does it truly mean to pursue a woman, even if you've been hurt, or even if you've perhaps done the hurting yourself? Because there could be either one. So how do you truly pursue a woman and show up and make your intentions known? How do you continue doing it? Because I'm learning consistency is the key.
Mhm.
Consistency is the key. And so just want to get your thoughts about, you said you're the only single guy for Miles.
Mhm.
So, just, some woman enters into your life tomorrow and now all of a sudden you have to pursue her. So what does that look like?
Okay, first off, you say consistency is key. I have a medallion I wear. It's a brass coin. You can't see it here, but Maritime Supply Company did this for me specifically. It's on their available on their website too, and it says consistency is key.
Wow.
Consistency is the currency in which we buy the things that we want. If you're not consistent, you'll never make it there. So to show up to pursue a woman requires intentionality, which means that I have to be calculated. We
Mhm.
as men are built as logical creatures. So logically, I have to start looking at that relationship from a logical standpoint. To
Yeah.
do that, I have to say, okay, she needs X amount of dates. She needs this. She needs that. I need to start formulating a plan to provide those things for her. If society has gone to where, oh, I provided you a house and a car and all these things, you should be good. That's not what a woman needs. She needs support. Yes, she needs all that other stuff. But if we think in the terms of house, car, things like that, we would have a plan. We'd be like, I need to get this job and you save this much money. I need to do this to get to retirement. We need to take that same intentionality and say, I need to do the same thing for this woman in other areas. We need to understand and learn what a woman is to pursue her. To pursue her is to be intentional with your communication with her, to check in on her daily, to check in on her in the morning and the evening, to make sure that she has eaten, to make sure she has made it to work and made it home from work. We are supposed to be the ones that worry and then spring into action if something happens. She gets a flat tire on the way to work. Guess what? I'm stopping everything I'm doing at work and I'm going to change that tire. That's intentionality and
Yeah.
putting her as a priority. Your job is a priority, but that woman should be a higher priority at all times. That's what it takes to pursue a woman, is to realize you have to put her first and you have to pursue her in the sense of you have to put in the effort, not her. You don't wait for her good morning text. You send her a good morning text. You tell her she's beautiful. You leave notes for her. Don't let her do those things for you, because then you're sitting back on your haunches and you're playing the female role. And
Yeah.
that's how society has flip-flopped, is that the women are pursuing the men these days.
Mm.
No, 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 we should be pursuing them. And
Yeah.
then those same men that aren't pursuing and aren't actually being intentional, they're the first to complain that that woman is not doing what they need. And I'm
Oof.
like, she's not providing for your needs because you are doing nothing to provide for hers, and you're sitting there acting like you deserve to be a king. A
Oof.
king is required to govern his people with love and with sovereignty and all that stuff. If you're not doing that, then you're not going to get you're not going to get people that submit to you. To get her to submit, you have to first realize that it's your job to provide everything for her and to support her. She will then reciprocate naturally. That's why men are like, women don't want to follow a good leader. No, no, you're not leading. What you're doing is demanding and manipulating. That is not, you're controlling the person,
Mm,
right? Good leaders provide for their people, and in doing so, the workers work harder for the leader. When we
mm,
demand things and we are a boss of people, it doesn't work. So to pursue a woman means that we have to put in the effort. And then on the backside is where we get taken care of by that woman. When we do get her to submit, she will submit because she knows that she's going for a man that is willing to put the effort in and continue to go every single day, even when she is a little bit frazzled, even when she is messy. She realizes that you're the man. Now she wants to provide for you and your needs. You'll get everything you want if you do that. And I've
yeah.
proven that in several relationships. Now that granted, those relationships ended because long distance, it just wasn't a good fit in other ways. But in every case, those women will tell you that I was really all about their needs. I took care of them. I always made sure that they were taken care of, and I pursued them intentionally. And I told them, I want to be in a relationship with you and I want to build with you. That's intentionality, not, well, I'm just going to go and see where we go and see what we're going to be. No. You want to date her to get to know her, or you don't. There's
Yeah.
no in between. That in between is what is killing the dating world these days.
Yeah. It is. I was part of a group and someone said, date them all until you find the one. And I'm just like, I don't have, number one, I don't have the bandwidth for that. I don't have the capacity for that. I just don't understand how that works. But I love what you said about intentionality because, and you talked about submission, right? And this is a very touchy subject, especially in the Christian world where people don't truly understand the concept of submission, especially when it comes to, and they think it's just blind obedience. And they think it's just the man can be this domineering and tyrannical individual. But what most people don't realize, and this is something that I'm learning, is before Paul even says, wives submit to your husbands, he says something that's very important that a man needs to do, and that's husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church. But he takes it a step further, right? He doesn't just say as Christ loved the church and stops there. He goes on to say who gave himself, who sacrificed himself. Like you said, you get a flat tire, you're gonna sacrifice for her. You're going to sacrifice what you're doing. You're going to sacrifice your time. You're going to sacrifice your energy. You're going to sacrifice your sleep. You're going to give yourself for her in order to make sure that, number one, you provide that emotional safety, you make sure that you promote that spiritual growth and maturity, you promote the relationship, and then a woman will if you're, and the other thing that I'm learning is that I am not the model for how she should be loved, right? She's not even the expectation on how she should be loved. She can say all she wants until she's blue in I need to be loved like this. You need to love me XYZ. I need to say this. I want to love you like this, this, this. And yet neither one of us are the model for what that love looks like. He is the model. And so it's so important for us when we're doing it is I feel like if we love him first, if we love him properly, if we love him correctly, then we will be able to adequately love her. We'll be able to pursue her. We'll be able to identify her needs. We'll be able to do all of the different things. We'll be able to be intentional, and then we will provide that space for her. And this is a conversation that I don't think a lot of people are having, or if they're having, they do it. And I don't profess to be an expert. I'm not. I'm still learning as I go. I still stumble and make mistakes, and I'm sure you could say the same thing. But it's understanding that I am called to love like Christ, and you mentioned but leading. I'm called to love like Christ, and I'm called to lead like Christ. He
Mhm.
is the example. He is the model, and he is the pattern. I have one final question, and with this one is, I guess you could say I saved the best for last. But I really wanted to ask you this question. Nothing to do with your reels.
Okay.
Uh, so it's this. So you familiar with the artist Dax?
Oh yeah.
Okay. So Dax released a song, and it's called "To Be a Man," right? And so culture and society has labeled and defined what it means to be a man, And so the question that I would have for you is, what does true in all of your experience, because you're a former Army Ranger, right? Like some would look at that and be like, that is the ultimate sign of masculinity. Like this guy served in the Army, you know, you drive a Jeep. And some people may look at that and be like, those are the ultimate signs of what it means to be a man. And that's good. That's great. But, and I see your face, which I love seeing your face with that. So my question is, what does, in your opinion, what does true masculinity look like? And how do we reconcile that with how the Bible says we should be a man?
That's a good one. I would say that truly being a man is knowing that there's strength in softness,
Oof.
right?
Say that again.
And there is strength in softness, right?
Oof.
I
Yeah.
always like to say, like, I'm soft as fleece, but I'm hard as a rock. Well, it just depends on the situation. There's, Jordan Peterson, very famous philosopher guy that's been all over Instagram for the last few years. He talks about there is more strength in a man that knows how to be violent and holds it back than there is in a man that is not capable of violence and is nice to everyone.
Yeah.
Right. And that's what it is to be a man, is knowing when to be soft and when to
Mm,
be hard. Right.
mm,
The time to be hard isn't when your woman is being frazzled by her day and all these wrong things are going on. Right. That's your moment to be soft. The moment to be hard is when someone is charging at her and you need to pull out a gun, a knife, do whatever you got to do to protect your woman. That's when it's time to be hard. Right. And the best way I can explain what a man really is knowing the difference and having the discernment to know when and where it's appropriate to be hard and when and where it's appropriate to be soft. And that
mm.
doesn't mean soft as in like you're going to cry. Yeah, you can cry. And it's knowing how to do that as a man. It's knowing how to communicate your needs as a man to a woman in a way that's going to spur her on to do that for you. But you hit the nail on the head earlier. It calls for you to submit to your wife the same way she is submitting to you. The
Mm,
problem is many men lead from the place of what they want, not what
mm,
God wants from them. And if
mm.
we do not have discernment from God as to where I'm supposed to be leading that relationship, then I am not leading from a place of God. If I don't lead from a place of God, she will never submit. She knows.
Yeah.
Women's intuition was designed, in my opinion, for her to be able to discern if that man is leading from Christ and not leading from Christ. If he leads from Christ, she will naturally submit. If he does not lead from Christ, she will buck it every single time.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so good. I've had the conversation even just about passivity and just no place for being passive at all in a relationship, and just the need. And I love it. Strength in softness, and because it requires, honestly, it just requires honesty. It requires vulnerability. It requires being, and I again, I go back to what Paul said about Christ and sacrificing himself. And I love it. I'm convinced the ultimate example for what it means to be a man is Jesus. People may argue with me, people may debate me with that, people may put in the comments, I think you're wrong. But at the end of the day, when it comes to how a man needs to love a woman, Paul only referenced one person, and that was Christ. This
Mhm.
is what you need to do. You need to love her as Christ loved the church. And I think we've got it all backwards and countercultural and we've associated what it means to be a man and masculinity with and we've let culture and society define what it means to be it, rather than as a believer and as a follower of Christ, okay, letting the Bible define it. And I was
Mhm.
talking to someone today, and here's what I'm convinced. And I don't know if you would agree with it. I'm convinced one of the greatest marks of what it means to be a man is what the Bible says about David. And the Bible talks about David as being a man after God's own heart.
Mhm.
And I think for me, that's what I strive to do. I feel like if you striving to be a man after his heart, if you strive to follow him, if you strive to obey him, if you strive to hear his voice and let him lead and let him guide, because at the end of the day, that's what we're all called to do. That's what we're all called to love him. We're all called to serve him. We're all called to worship him. So
Amen.
I just want to ask, as we bring this to a close, are there any final remarks or any, we'll just say, if you were to be able to create a reel right now, 60 seconds, 90 seconds, and, don't mean to put you on the spot, but anything that you would leave to anyone who watches this?
Mm. Be the person that that a version of you 10 years ago would be proud of.
Oof.
Don't sulk back into bad patterns. Like looking back, like 10 years ago, you probably would have said, oh, 10 years from now, I want to be this, this, and this. And you're not there. So how do you get there? You start being a person that's different. You start doing what you know you need to do instead of putting it off for another day. You start
Mhm.
leaning into those fears, even when it's uncomfortable. You start having the conversations with people that you've got to have, and just let it flow. Because if you're being obedient to God, it's going to happen. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. Chris, I really want to thank you for coming on.
Not a problem.
I appreciate it. It's an honor, and I love it. You're just a regular guy. You
Just a
just
regular guy. Everyone thinks that because I have a large Instagram that I'm somebody, but I just have the ability to put into words what all of us feel. That's it. You know,
Yeah.
some people are great at making paintings. Some great people are great at making music. Some people are great at, building great big things in the world, buildings or whatever. But at the end of the day, God blessed me with the ability to, in the prose and in the way I speak, that people feel comforted and they listen and they feel connected because of the way I do that. That was God's gift to me. That
Yeah.
doesn't mean that like I'm something special. That just means well, we all are in our own way, but it just means that I've discovered my path. I've
Yeah.
discovered what God gave me innately that he didn't give anyone else. And there's a reason for that.
Yeah. For anyone who watches this video on the playback, I'm going to have a link to be able to go check out. I'm going to have a link to check out Chris on Instagram, True North Motivation. I'm going to have a link to get his book as well. I'm excited to get it. So, Chris, I plan on getting your book.
I
So
appreciate it. It's a
that,
good journey. Those 41 days are amazing. The feedback I've got, mother and daughters that have been almost to the point of not being in contact with each other that have decided to do the book together, and it brought them back together. And just the amazing things that I'm hearing from people that have done the whole 41 days straight through without taking a break. They were shocked at what it did for them. And so I implore anyone listening to go get the book, do the 41-day challenge. I wrote it, but guess what? It came from God. I promise you it came from God,
amen.
and it's an amazing transformation that you'll see in your mental health as well as your relationship with Christ in the same time.
Wow. Well, I plan on getting 2 copies. So you've already got 2 more orders just from this video.
Awesome. Awesome.
So I definitely I want to thank you. I want to thank you for what you do. Once again, thank you for your service. I appreciate that. Thank you for coming on. For anyone who watches this video, I want to thank you so much for your support. Feel free to feel free to leave a comment, feel free to share this video, because I believe that what we heard today and what you heard today was transformative. And I believe if you put some of these principles into practice,
Mhm.
you will experience growth, you'll experience maturity, you'll experience transformation, and ultimately you will experience what God ultimately has for you. So I want to thank everyone for tuning in. God bless, and we'll see you all next time.